What if I told you there is a country on the border of the United States where over 132,000 people have vanished, where journalists are killed for doing their jobs, where police departments have been shut down because they were found to be working for the other side? You would probably assume I was talking about somewhere in the middle of a war zone. I am talking about Mexico, and it is worse than you think. This is not a crime story. This is a story about what happens when a criminal organization becomes more powerful than the government trying to stop it. Mexico did not always have a cartel problem on this scale. For most of the 20th century, the drug trade was controlled, not because the government was clean, but because it was corrupt in an organized way. The Institutional Revolutionary Party ruled Mexico for 71 consecutive years. Politicians, police, military, and traffickers all operated within an understood hierarchy. The government tolerated the drug trade. The drug trade tolerated the government. Violence was kept at manageable levels because everyone had a reason to follow the rules. Then, in the year 2000, that party lost power for the first time in 7 decades. That was supposed to be a good thing. When the old political machine collapsed, the informal agreements that had kept traffickers in line collapsed with it. The cartels no longer had a single government to answer to. Organizations that had coexisted began fighting each other for territory and roots. Between 2000 and 2006, cartel-related homicides more than doubled. Newly elected President Felipe Calderón responded by deploying the Mexican military directly against the cartels and launching what became known as the Kingpin strategy, targeting and eliminating cartel leadership on the theory that dismantling the top of the organization would collapse the whole structure. Killing a cartel boss does not destroy the cartel, it fragments it. Fragmentation means multiple successor factions fighting each other for the territory the old boss used to run. Ciudad Juárez recorded over 3,000 homicides in 2010 alone, in a city of roughly 1.5 million people. By some measures, it was the most dangerous city on Earth that year. Between 2006 and 2012, an estimated 60,000 people were killed in cartel-related violence across Mexico. The Kingpin strategy kept producing the same outcome: take down a leader. Watch the organization splinter. Watch the splinters go to war. When El Chapo was first arrested in 2014, the Mexican government celebrated it as a turning point. Within 18 months, he had escaped through a tunnel that ran over a mile from his cell. A construction project that took months and that nobody inside the maximum security facility apparently noticed. He was recaptured in 2016 and extradited to the United States. The Sinaloa Cartel, which he had built into the most powerful drug trafficking organization in the world, kept operating without interruption. When its leadership fractured in 2023 following the arrest of another senior figure, the cartel did not collapse. It split into 2 factions, and both continued moving product across the border. The major cartels generate somewhere between $19 billion and $29 billion per year from drug trafficking into the United States alone. That figure does not include extortion, human smuggling, fuel theft, or kidnapping. The Sinaloa Cartel has operated in over 50 countries. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, which barely existed before 2010, now has a presence across more than 20 Mexican states and operations reaching into the United States, Europe, and Asia. In 2015, it ambushed a Mexican federal police convoy with rocket-propelled grenades and brought down a military helicopter with a rocket. In 2019, it deployed armored vehicles and heavy weapons to break a government operation attempting to arrest the son of El Chapo, forcing Mexican security forces to release their prisoner and retreat. Both organizations have logistics operations, financial systems, money laundering networks, and military-grade weapons that in some cases exceed what Mexican police forces carry. In large sections of Mexico, the cartels provide what the government does not. In Michoacan, the Knights Templar cartel ran a taxation system covering avocado farmers, lime growers, and steel producers. When the Knights Templar were weakened, the Jalisco New Generation cartel moved in and imposed the same systems. In Tamaulipas, the Gulf Cartel has at various points controlled access to entire municipalities, operating checkpoints on public roads and charging fees for passage. In Guerrero, criminal organizations effectively govern entire communities, collecting fees, resolving disputes, and punishing violations of their rules. The Mexican government collects taxes in these areas. So do the cartels. Businesses in many parts of Mexico pay extortion fees as a routine operating cost, and not to one organization but sometimes to multiple competing ones simultaneously, each demanding payment for operating in their claimed territory. The corruption runs deeper than individual officers taking bribes. In 2009, the federal government arrested 10 mayors in a single day in Michoacan on charges of collaborating with La Familia Cartel and suspended the entire police force of Ciudad Juarez after it was found to be compromised. In 2014, 43 students from a rural teachers' college in Ayotzinapa disappeared after local police handed them over to a cartel. The case became one of the most investigated and most unresolved crimes in Mexican history. Federal investigators were eventually found to have tampered with the evidence. A government commission concluded in 2022 that what happened to the students constituted a state crime, meaning agents of the Mexican government were directly involved in their disappearance. The Zetas began as roughly 30 deserters from Mexico's elite Airborne Special Forces unit, who were recruited by the Gulf Cartel in the late 1990s. They eventually broke away, formed their own organization, and by 2012 were operating in more Mexican states than any other cartel. Their original members had received counterinsurgency training from United States Special Forces, training designed to fight drug traffickers that was ultimately used to build one. Between 2000 and 2022, more than 150 journalists were killed in Mexico. Local newsrooms in cartel-controlled regions have stopped covering organized crime entirely in many cases. In the state of Tamaulipas, some outlets have gone years without publishing a single story about cartel activity while operating in the middle of active cartel territory. The Committee to Protect Journalists has consistently ranked Mexico among the 5 most dangerous countries in the world for press freedom, alongside active conflict zones. In 2017, journalist Javier Valdez, who had spent years documenting the Sinaloa cartel, was shot dead in broad daylight outside his own newsroom in Culiacan. He had received threats for years. The Mexican government opened an investigation. The men who ordered his killing were never brought to justice. A 2012 investigation found that over 68,000 weapons recovered at Mexican crime scenes between 2007 and 2011 were traced back to United States gun dealers. The flow runs in both directions across that border. Drugs move north, cash and weapons move south. Fentanyl precursor chemicals arrive from China, get processed in Mexico, and cross into the United States in quantities that border agents cannot meaningfully intercept. A lethal dose of fentanyl is 2 milligrams. In 2023, synthetic opioids killed over 74,000 Americans. More deaths than the entire Vietnam War produced over a decade of fighting. By 2022, fentanyl had overtaken car accidents as the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. The cartels that produce and distribute it are operating with a business model more profitable and more difficult to disrupt than anything the drug trade has produced before. Pemex, Mexico's national oil company, loses an estimated $1.5 billion per year to cartel fuel theft. Cartels have taken over significant portions of the avocado industry in Michoacan, the lime trade in Colima, and illegal logging operations across multiple states. They tax businesses, extort construction projects, and in some areas collect a cut from every commercial transaction that takes place in their territory. Mining operations in several states pay cartel fees to operate. Fishing communities along the Pacific coast have been forced into illegal fishing and shark fin harvesting under cartel direction. The cartels have diversified so thoroughly that eliminating the drug trade entirely would not eliminate them. President Claudia Sheinbaum, who took office in late 2024, inherited a security approach built around reducing confrontation rather than escalating it. The policy was called Hugs Not Bullets, social spending, job programs, and targeted negotiations in cartel-influenced areas rather than military campaigns. Homicide rates in 2024 remained among the highest in the country's recorded history. In the first months of 2025, several states recorded increases in cartel-related killings compared to the same period the previous year. Sheinbaum has faced additional pressure from the United States government, which designated several Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations in early 2025, raising the possibility of unilateral American military or law enforcement action on Mexican soil, a prospect that produced a formal diplomatic protest from the Mexican government and a public warning from Sheinbaum that Mexican sovereignty was not negotiable. Mexico is not losing this war because it lacks soldiers or resources. It is losing because the enemy is inside the institutions. Every major operation against a cartel risks being compromised before it begins because someone inside the planning process is on the other side's payroll. Raids get tipped off, arrests get reversed, evidence disappears, witnesses vanish. The problem is older than the war, deeper than any one administration, entangled up in the economies and politics of two countries in ways that neither government has ever been willing to confront directly. At the start of this video, the answer seemed simple. It is a border problem, a drug problem, a Mexico problem. It is none of those things. It is what happens when corruption runs deep enough, long enough, that the people meant to stop it become part of it. Subscribe if you want to keep pulling on threads like this one.